Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you again. I'm Neely Hicks, and this is my co-host, Davey Tucker.
And we welcome you again to the chapel at American Baptist College in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yes. And we know that there was a wild, roaring round of applause for Davey. And so we celebrate you, Davey. So this is Engaging Religion and Politics, the fourth of 5 sessions that is based on the Statement of Conscience, which many of you signed. If you have not signed that, I encourage you to go to the Harper Hill Global Facebook page and look at that. And if you feel led, go ahead and sign. This last week, it was in the Nashville Scene in the Best of issue. There was also a press release that got this message out to many throughout the state and the nation. And there's also going to be an op-ed in the Tennessean. So we are trying to do all that we can as leaders of faith traditions to be able to come together and raise awareness on issues that all of humankind is facing right now here in the United States. And us all moving together in a positive way is going to make a big difference. So we are going to get started now with introductions. So Davey, you can begin.
Thank you. I'd like to first to introduce Michael McCurry, born October 27th, 1954. He is best known for having served in Bill Clinton's administration as the nation's 18th White House press secretary. He is a Washington-based communications consultant and is associated with the firm Public Strategies Washington Incorporated. He's also active within the administration of the United Methodist Church, serving as a lay delegate to the Church General Conference and on various denominational boards. He's currently co-chairs a commission on presidential debates. Born in Charleston, South Carolina, we'd like to welcome you to our midst tonight, Mr. McCurry.
Welcome. Next is Sabina Mohyuddin, and I would like to introduce her to you. Sabina is here in Nashville with me and Davey, and she is the executive director of the American Muslim Advisory Council of Tennessee. She is a Bangladeshi American Muslim born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. She graduated from Vanderbilt University in 1993 with a degree in mechanical engineering. She, in 2010, helped launch the Sons and Daughters of Abraham project, which brings Muslim, Christian, and Jewish youth across Middle Tennessee together through interfaith dialogue and outreach programs. That's wonderful. She has been active amplifying her voice through a number of articles published in the Tennessean. She's a founding board member and currently executive director of the American Muslim Advisory Council, which empowers the Muslim community in Tennessee through civic engagement, community building, and improved media relations. Sabina, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
Now it's my pleasure to announce our third guest, Rabbi David Saperstein. He is a rabbi, a lawyer, and a Jewish community leader who has served as the United States Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. He previously served as the Director and Chief Legal Counsel at the Union for Reform Judaism's Religious Action Center. And I also count him as a friend of mine. Good evening. It's good to see you again, Rabbi.
Well, honored to be with you. And I take it I'm supposed to start off here, am I right?
That's right. You each have 5-minute introductory remarks.
So let me, I had the opportunity to introduce myself to your listeners. I'm really delighted to be with both of you. You were, I have to say, the most fun host I've dealt with in a while in these kinds of talks. With all the people from your community, I'm glad my friend and colleague, Rabbi Mark Shifton, has been so involved in efforts here as well. And it's always an honor to meet Sabina Mohyuddin. The work you do sounds fascinating. And I have to tell you what a treasure it is who we have with us tonight in Mike McCurry. I hear a formidable political presence and a deeply thoughtful religious thinker, and about the intersection of the two. But rather than saying anything more on myself, let me set the context a little. I know we're going to talk about communications. I want to talk about the moment we're at in terms of hate speech and hate crimes, the divisiveness that's going on in our country. It's no secret to anyone here. And we've seen an explosion of hate groups, mostly on the right, some on the left, of hate acts against Jews and Muslims and Blacks and gays and women in escalating numbers, and Sikhs and other religious minorities. We've witnessed the degradation of civil discourse, first in the dark corners of the internet, and then more publicly exacerbated by the anonymity of social media and the stamp of approval of such rhetoric by too many leaders in our nation. Dr. King said in the wake of the Birmingham church bombing that those 4 girls who perished have something to say to every politician who has fed his constituents with the stale bread of hatred and the spoiled meat of racism. They say to us that we must be concerned not merely about who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderer.
Yes.
And as you know, what transpired at Tree of Life 2 years ago is the most brutal, deadly anti-Semitic attack in the history of America. But it keenly pointed out to every Jew in this country what we know full well, that no group is going to be safe here, so long as any group can be victimized by such hate, and that the number of hate crimes against African Americans far surpasses even those targeting Jews, who have the highest rate of those targeted in terms of religious hate crimes here. So this is an urgent crisis that we face. We're gathered talking about this tonight because we've witnessed the surging in hate speech and the attendant surge in hate crimes in America. And they're linked. Hate speech and bigoted speech and racist speech, speech that demeans, that demonizes, that depicts those with whom we differ as the enemy, as evil, as a danger to our nation. Such violent rhetoric too often can spur violent action. And the damage that hate crimes do to inflict on their victims and on America is great, and it requires a national response as well as local responses. For hate crimes are more than mere acts of violence. They're more than murders, beatings, arsons, desecrations. They're more than the hatred of the speech and the harassment that goes with it online, in person, in the media. They're nothing less than attacks on the values that are the pillars of our republic and the guarantors of our freedom. They're a betrayal of the promise of America. They erode our national well-being. Those who commit these crimes do so fully intending to tear at the too often frayed threads of diversity that bind us together and make us strong. They seek to divide and conquer. They seek to tear us apart from within, pitting American against American, fomenting violence and civil discord. And that's what makes this gathering tonight so extraordinary, and how extraordinary the religious communities of America have been, who have arisen together to say this has no place in America, who has used the techniques that we have fashioned, our own voices from the pulpit, our organizing when one of us is attacked to stand together with others, Muslims cleaning up desecrated Jewish cemeteries in St. Louis and Philadelphia, the president and the head of 4 churches in Victoria, Texas, handing a set of keys to the imam of a mosque that had been burnt to the ground, here cleaning up graffiti and vandalism, working with the police to get them to help de-escalate and to stand with them and use our ability to de-escalate tensions. That's what the religious community is all about. It is a hallmark of interfaith coalitions in America that this gathering tonight represents. And when people come together across political, religious, cultural lines to build together a better America, they are modeling the very kind of America we hope to create. And for that, we have to look for each other and lift up the best practices that we'll hear about tonight. But we have to look to all of our political, religious, cultural, and civic leaders to help to transform America.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. Okay, so we're going back from reverse alphabetical order. So Sabina, we want to hear from you next.
I think Rabbi Saperstein said everything. I don't know, there's much more to say, but just putting in some context for the American Muslim community, and AMAC, American Muslim Advisory Council, is a statewide organization here in Tennessee. And we were founded after, in 2011, there was an anti-Sharia bill in the Tennessee state legislature. And so that wasn't the first attack on our community, but that was the most public and attack against our community. And that's when we understood that really to fight the Islamophobia and the rhetoric of trying to dehumanize Muslims and otherize us, and that we needed an institution beyond the mosques to do that. And that's how AMAC was formed. Thinking about, so a large part of our work is fighting Islamophobia. So everything we do, whether it's civic engagement, community building, or improved media relations, it is about fighting Islamophobia and giving our community a voice so that we're empowered and we are part and parcel of our communities and the society we live in. So it's an election year, right? And we know, and I'll probably be quoting, so the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding is an organization that does polling in the Muslim community. And through their polls realized that really hate crime, hate speech against Muslims are worse during an election season. So, sometimes people will think, well, it's probably going to be worse if there's some kind of terrorist attack or something like that, but it's actually election seasons and run up to wars. And so from the beginning of the year, I've been worried about this. I've been worried about what is going to happen, what problem will be created, or what problem will elected officials take advantage of to marginalize our community, to create that fear. And earlier this year, there's a spat between the U.S. and Iran, and I was like, okay, this is probably gonna start it all. But what is it that's used to create this fear? And that's what the politicians use. It's this fear mongering, this threat against our communities. And so they will paint the pictures of Muslims being prone to violence, and Muslims being unassimilable. So they can't be assimilated no matter what. That Muslims are, their values do not align with American values. And so literally, as the head of AMAC, I'm just like on the lookout, okay, what are politicians saying? How are they looking at us? And this summer there was an ad in the Tennessean that basically said that Islam was going to detonate a nuclear bomb in Nashville. So if you haven't heard that, it came out in the middle of June, and this is a major newspaper in Nashville, and they since apologized for it. But the fact that it ran, we knew that as an election year, this was not by accident.
And I want to pinpoint that was run in the newspaper by a supposedly Christian group.
Right. And these are there's Christian groups that are more focused on the end of times. So it's just kind of an end of time kind of predictions, and part of it was that. And so it really took our community by surprise that this would come out in a major newspaper, but it put us on alert. And we were already on alert that this is an election year. How is our community going to going to be thrown under the bus, right? And so this is where the work we do, whether it's educating people about what Islamophobia, we've already had 2 sessions with Tennessee and staff on understanding our community and how to report on our community, because the stories the media tell is very important, because oftentimes the only stories that are told in the media are when there is a terrorist attack or when there are cases of discrimination, which makes us look like, oh, we're always complaining that we're not getting a fair share. And you don't get sympathy from everyone when you complain you can wear a scarf while playing volleyball. And that happened recently here in Nashville, actually. And so, but telling more positive stories or everyday ordinary stories about our community, shapes perception. So how you communicate our stories matter. And it matters, and it builds kind of this, it makes the general public more resistant to those negative stories or that negative messaging that comes out. And it's oftentimes, it's coming out from elected officials, and it's coming out from paid Islamophobic speakers. And there's a whole network of that. And we're in a day and age where these network of Islamophobic speakers are embedded within the administration. And so it becomes even more challenging for our community.
Yes, thank you, Sabina.
Thank you.
Mike.
Well, it's hard to follow what both Sabina and David had said because I fully align myself with what they've said. But I think we have to confront some political reality here at the end of this campaign. There are going to be at least 45, 48% of the electorate that's going to vote for Donald Trump, which means more than 60 million Americans are going to align themselves with whatever Trump says. Now, I hope, obviously I'm a Democrat. I hope Joe Biden overcomes that. But we have to look at the root causes of what drives the people who are supporting Trump and what their sense of disengagement or, resentment is that brings them to the point that they would support someone that probably most of the people participating in this conversation probably think is abhorrent. But if you don't understand the root causes of what gives the Trump vote vitality and the resentment and the exasperation and the feeling of disengagement that they have and their resentment of elites like most of us on this call, if we don't understand that and don't address that, then we're going to see a perpetuation of some of the same divisions, even if, the election winds up with Biden winning and we go on and we'll just be the same polarized country that we're going to be with the same kind of resentments and the same kind of religious divisions that both Sabina and David talked about. So my goal is, and my work is about how do you bridge those kinds of differences and how do you bring people into some conversation about what the common good of our country is and how do you establish some links. I don't think we do a very good job of that, frankly. I don't think, we got a lot of resentment, we got a lot of power, we got a lot of vitriol about how we're going to go fight, these folks. But I don't hear anything about how we're going to bridge the differences that exist in these communities and how we bring them together. And maybe that's because it's just not possible anymore. Maybe it's just we're so polarized, we're never going to bring those folks around. But I would like to hear more conversation about how do you really build any kind of common understanding about what a common good is. And I hear very little of that, frankly, from the progressive left and from the center left in our faith communities and elsewhere. There's a lot of fight and a lot of willingness to kind of go to the wall and, march and do what we need to do. But that's not going to get us very far down the road if we look ahead. And then communities that are marginalized, the Islam community, other communities that are suffering, they're going to just still be left out of the conversation at the end of the day, because we're not building any way in which we have any kind of common understanding about what it is to be America. So, when are we going to start that conversation? What are we going to do about that?
We are going to do it. We are going to change the world.
Say that again, Neely.
We are going to do this. We are going to change the world, because the truth is, we are people of faith, like all of us on this call tonight. And so even if we don't believe in the inherent ability in humankind to overcome these divisions, we see that God can help people do things that you would never think they could do. We believe in these stories of restoration and resurrection and new life in people who did horrible things.
Right.
So,
Right. But honestly, the faith community is politically inept, and they have not been very good at using any of their influence and mobilizing and really getting engaged. Now, there are exceptions to that. There are people doing good work trying to make that happen, but we don't see the kind of mobilization from the faith community that would really help transform the dialogue and make our politics more authentic and revealing of what the conversation is that we need to have in this country. And I work on this a lot, and I get, sometimes a little despairing, because it's just like, it's not natural for faith people and clergy and others to dig in and do the hard work of politics. It just doesn't happen. And how do you make that happen, and how do you change that equation? I mean, that's something I hope we spent a lot of time thinking about in the last couple of days of this national election. But it's got to happen over time, and it's got to happen if we're going to make any real change happen as we go through the next administration, the next 4 years.
I'd like to add to what Mike was saying, because when the Tennessean ad came out, and we had a sign-on letter, which a lot of community leaders, a lot of faith leaders signed on against hate and divisiveness and coming together. And but somebody complained to me, well, where are the evangelical churches? Where are the conservative faith leaders? Have they signed on? Because without them, is anything going to actually change? And so, I lived for 16 years in Tullahoma, Tennessee, in rural Tennessee, 90, 95, 98% white. And being there, you realize that, okay, you get to know people, and people will accept you, but they'll accept you as the exception. You're okay because I got to know you personally, but the rest of your people are problematic. And how do you engage that? I was homeschooling my children at the time, and I joined a homeschooling co-op and didn't realize until I joined that it was a Christian co-op. So these were, many of them, very evangelical Christians, conservative Christians. And but I was like, everything around me is Christian. I have no problem with it. And so I was going every week with my kids and realizing that these, the other attendees never met another Muslim. I mean, literally, somebody asked me, how do you spell Islam? And they never met a Muslim. And so the conversations I was having, I realized, okay, we have a lot in common. And just seeing that commonality, it changed my perception, and all the stereotypes that I would say more people with maybe more liberal backgrounds have of religious conservative Christians, and really coming to the root of okay, we all care about our children, we all care about children's education, what their future is like. But it was very challenging. And obviously there are not Muslims in every small town to break those barriers. And eventually I had to leave because of a lot of stereotypes about Muslims and efforts to convert in those spaces. But it's just that question, like, how do you go beyond somebody seeing you as the exception and really translating it to the rest of your community? And I struggle with that, and because I really don't care if somebody just likes me. That doesn't do much. I'm about my community. I'm about my children being able to grow up and live in a society where they can be openly, unapologetically Muslim in every space, but I also understand Christians and Jews should be openly, unapologetically practicing their religion in those same spaces too. And so how do we create those spaces where we can come together, collaborate, get to know each other? So that's the question I have.
Okay, well, let me just try to merge a little bit of what you were saying, Ms. Mohyuddin. Did I say that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what Mr. McCurry was saying. And I'm a student of the civil rights movement. And one of the things that I noticed, particularly in a lot of the pictures, that during marches, you would see a representation of all faiths that would march arm in arm. And in my own activism, that does not happen. And I guess my question to get us started is, how do we get here when it appeared that 50 years ago, there was more connectivity around the idea of faith, not the specificity of faith, but the idea of faith that allowed us to come together, as Mike was talking about, for the common good. So here we are, where we are right now. Theologically, I am an evangelical, but the term has been co-opted to mean there is a political bent on that, to where I don't even dare to even try to explain that anymore. I just say, no, I'm not an evangelical. So how did we get from what seemed to be a closer period 50 years ago to where we are today, particularly when the president of the United States, when called to denounce white supremacists, will do obvious dog whistle of Proud Boys, stand back and stand by? How do we get here? Can I start with David and then jump to Sabina and then up to Mike? You're on mute, David.
So one word about how we got here. I want to focus more on what to do about it. There is a fascinating dynamic about religion in the 20th, beginning of the 21st century. If you think about who, for much of the 20th century until the 1970s, let's say, was regarded as the authentic voices of religion, the most outstanding personages, it was the Martin Luther Kings, the Abraham Joshua Heschels, the Stephen S. Wises, the John Haynes Holmes, the John Courtney Murrays, Pope John the 23rd, and even non-clergy figures like Jinnah of Pakistan here, and even Gandhi, who personally was very fundamentalist in his Hinduism, but in talking about religion in public life was very tolerant and open and moderate. Here, they were the authentic voices. Here, somehow, there has been this shift in which authenticity and fundamentalism has been linked together in the news media, in the entertainment media, and I think even in our own thinking about things. I venture to guess if you asked a fourth grade class of kids in our religious schools in a Reformed synagogue to draw a picture of a Jew, that half of them would draw a picture of a chassid instead of themselves. One of the Hasidic Jews here. I mean, there is this kind of equation that somehow if you're more fundamentalist, you're more authentic. It's a battle that all of us are in together. Every religious group has this problem of extremist, fundamental extremists. I don't care, by the way, extremism is anyone who uses force to coerce their views on you. I don't care what your theology is. I don't care how fundamentalist your theology is here. But that kind of melding of fundamentalism and extremism, often regarded as authentic. So there are a lot of things, you know, that we're in it together that we can do. But let me just indulge me a minute or two more here. Let me just mention just some of the things. And Mike, afterwards or later, we can perhaps debate a little about the efficacy of the more moderate religious groups in politics. I see it a little differently than you do, I think, but maybe not if we talk about it. Here. So first, here, we have to structure this. We have to structure this. Here. So you identified, you know, evangelicals, you identified Muslims, and let me take Jews as a third group who have very little to do with each other comparatively. Here. So a bunch of us got together, Reverend Bob Roberts, an evangelical mega pastor in Texas, and Imam Majid, a prominent Muslim figure, and myself and others, to build something called the Multi-Faith Neighbors Network, to pull together evangelicals, Muslims, and Jews in dialogue with each other, Jews from all the streams of Judaism in dialogue with each other. And it involves going on a retreat together, studying text together, making a commitment to invite each other over to their houses to celebrate holidays together, to work on a common project, because working together, dialoguing is indispensable, but it's not enough. You build trust, more trust, working together on common projects in your community than you do otherwise, and stand together whenever anything happened that endangered the various communities. It's been transformative for the people that are there. And those are the indicia of programs that really can work. And one final word on this, it requires building those relations not at a time of crisis, not at a time of stress. They have to be in place for when moments of stress happens. I talked about religion. You can say the same thing about your relations with the media. Here, the time to really dialogue with them about how to cover stories, what to do if something bad does happen, who are the authentic voices that they can turn to, has to happen not at moments of crisis. They have to know that in advance. The editors, whoever has a religion beat, and whoever's ever covering news aspects likely to be involved with religion. The same with law enforcement and political leaders. You need to be dialoguing with them, not at times of crisis, building those relationships so that when bad things happen, here, you know each other, trust each other, and can stand together on these things. So I do think that there's you know, a lot that we can do to be responsive to the changes, Reverend Tucker, that you so eloquently just set on the table for us.
Thank you. Sabina.
You know, and you know, something that, you know, the rabbi was saying, you know, religious extremism is everywhere, right? And but you know, what I see in the community, that there are people who like to see things in black and white. It's either good or bad.
Mhm.
And life happens in the middle. and these you know, these kind of you know, cooperation and allyship that we really need in order to tackle social justice issues. You know, it means working with people you disagree with, but fundamentally on some, maybe in theology, but it could be on social issues, you know, with, you know, Muslims. Sometimes it will be the gay issue. And so, and trying to make them understand, you don't have to agree with everyone on everything. You know, just like we want to be able to hold on to whatever values or dogma that we have, we should have to allow that space for other people also, and be able to get together. And, you know, another thing that Rabbi said, I love, just like, you know, you got to get beyond dialogue. And the dialogue has to happen before moments of crisis. What I do with the Sons and Daughters of Abraham project, I mean, that was a collaboration with me when I was living in Tullahoma, but I was still volunteering in Nashville, and with a reverend in the Episcopal Church up in Swanee, Tennessee. And it was her idea to bring the three different faith groups, their youth of the three different faith groups together. And it started out as kind of dialogue and having fun, eating together, playing together. But over the years, I was realizing some of the kids were just tired of dialogue, especially Muslim kids, because you're always having to explain yourself. You're always having to go explain, no, this is what Islam is and not. But getting together for outreach activities, to think and work together, it takes you to another level. And we have to build those relationships and take those small steps, so that when these big issues come, we're on board just like that. And so it is the work with me, with AMAC, that is that's the work I do. I connect with other organizations and try to get Muslim leaders, mosque leaders, but in and understanding what these issues are, so they're on top of it when it comes front and center.
Thank you. Mr. Mike.
I want to pick up on what Sabina just said, but raise an uncomfortable truth, which is, most people now, and especially most young people, have no interest in organized religion. They're not participating in church. They're not going to, worship on a regular basis. It's just not in it for them, and they're just it doesn't matter to them. And if it doesn't matter to them, it means because there's something about what we are doing in the faith community that makes it less relevant to them. And how do you make the work that we believe in, whatever our faith tradition is, in any of the monotheistic traditions, how do you make it more relevant and important, especially to our younger folk, so that they sort of say, yeah, this is something I need to be a part of? And I think Sabina began to hit on it a little bit there. You've got to do something that causes them to believe that there's something here important for me to participate in. And how you get disinterested young people who've got so many other distractions in life to think about their spirituality, their faith, what drives them to be a part of a community of believers in whatever they believe in, and make that part of how they kind of respond to some of the urgent crises that we face. We've got to do a better job of that. We're failing at that. We're just not giving people the kind of motivation and the inspiration that they need to sort of say, I want to be a part of this community, whatever the faith community is. It could be any of the traditions that the three of us represent, but we're failing at that. And as a result, we have the problem of what we call the nuns, not the nuns with habits, but the non-affiliated, the people who just don't have any affiliation with any kind of organized religion. And that's a problem for the church broadly defined, because either we believe that our faith matters and that what we do and professes our faith has to be a part of who we are and how we respond and how we engage in the community, or it's all just like, we're whiffing away on Sunday mornings or Saturday afternoons, and Friday evenings, and it's not connecting with anybody. So I think there's a real big challenge there for what we broadly define as the faith community. And frankly, the work I do, it's a challenge in seminaries. How do you teach young people who are going to go out and serve the church on how to be engaged and motivate people and get them engaged and get them, reawakened to some of the possibilities that happen when people of faith come together to make real political change happen. We captured that in the 1960s with the civil rights movement. Frankly, the right wing captured that with the moral majority in the 1970s, 1980s. They got momentum on what they're doing. And right now it's a little stagnant because I don't see where the energy is that is coming to kind of motivate people of faith to get out there and do the hard work of making real political change happen. That's the work I think a lot of us need to be focused on, because if our faith is going to make a difference, it's going to have to be aimed at how do you get people motivated and inspired to make real change happen. And right now, I think we're kind of stagnant on that front. I'm open to criticism on that point.
Can I try a slightly more hopeful narrative of this, Mike? You have all the pieces right. I don't disagree with anything you've said. I'll make it even more dramatic here. If you look at the numbers of people who are affiliated with the mainline Protestant communities, denominations in 1960, and compare it to now, every single one of the major groups is half the size they were back then, some even more. There's been a distinct decline in this here, which speaks, since they were so important in many of the great social justice achievements of the 20th century, that speaks to your point about the comparative weakness of this compared to what it was in the middle of that century. But let me offer another way of thinking about this here. It has always been a dynamic over the last 3 to 4 generations that when people were done with either bar mitzvah, youth group, or confirmation, they tended to move away from the active involvement in the church as they went to college or went to their first jobs, and didn't return until they got married, and particularly until they had kids. And then they came back and tended to not just come back, some just to send their kids, but many really getting re-involved and re-engaged with the church. That's been the pattern. The difference is that people used to get married until recently when they were in their mid-20s and have kids by the end of their 20s, some even younger than that. So they weren't out that long. Today, they're getting married in their 30s and having kids in their mid to late 30s about it, leaving them out of the loop, even if that dynamic continues for 20 years. It is interesting that not Gallup or Pew or PRRI in any of the polling they've done on this, that is, seen the increase in the none of the above. Which denomination do you affiliate with? Do you go to church? Say none of the above of the choices that they're given. You're nuns. Here, none of them ask the question, if you have a family and have children, do you intend to go back to the church? So we're working a little blind on actually knowing the dynamic, which would change the tactics we have. But let me just point this out during the same period of time. When I grew up, the largest segment of the Jewish community was the conservative Jewish movement. Since that time, the Reformed Jewish movement has been growing by leaps and bounds. It's larger than the Orthodox, conservative, Reconstructionist streams combined today. And it is for the intersection of the fact that Alex Schindler had this vision of opening up our congregations to the intermarried and welcoming them in, opening them up to the LGBTQ community and welcoming them in, almost and earlier than any other segment of the Jewish community and most other communities did. We never walked away from our passion for social justice. It was a defining aspect of who we were. We stood for something. And if the religion we offer our youth does not speak to the great moral issues of their lives or the world that they will inherit from us, it will not it will not evoke their engagement or their loyalty about it. The Unitarian Church has done comparatively well too, with its emphasis on social justice. We don't have the IRD segment of the religious community pulling the mainline Protestant groups to the right that they have had. And I think it testifies to what you're saying. There's a power in the social justice, engagement in the the politics of our nation, politics writ large here that's very powerful and can be a partial answer to the challenge that you've posed to us. And I think there's some hopeful signs that when we do, it happens. Many of those people who you have identified as the nuns, the polls also show that many of them believe in God, a minority, but a number of them believe in God. A larger group says they're spiritually questing.
Yeah.
And many of them are part of Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone analysis of America. People don't like to join anything today, the way that they used to in the mid 20th century. We're all fighting that dynamic. But I don't think it's a disavowal necessarily of America. If 40% of the millennial and Gen X generation identify as nuns, which is the number, and that is for obviously organized religion, a deep threat, it means 60% of that generation still identifies here. That's a pretty hopeful sign for us if we can do something with it, as you are challenging us to build on the vision you are putting forward as a way to really give them a sense of religious purpose.
Let me just, sorry, Sabina, but I just want to personally validate what David just said, that you just exactly described my own story. Growing up as a church kid, going through confirmation, going to church regularly when I was, a kid, then drifting away from the church, not being involved, and then getting re-engaged in the church once I got married and I had kids. And so maybe there's a formula there that we ought to explore a little bit more, because there is this disaffection that's going to happen at some point when people are in college or they're working their first job or they're away from the organized religion that they may have had growing up, but then they come back to it. And why do they come back, and what makes them want to be a part of that community? And I think exploring the reasons for that, and then, accentuating that so that we actually give them more inspiration and power and belief that it'll make a difference if they come back. I mean, I think that's where you have to concentrate some effort. Sorry, Sabina, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
And I need to come back because I do want to stay on the topic of communications. There's so much that we can talk about. And what I'm hearing in this last 30 minutes of conversation, we've been talking about really how the learning is in the practice, that each of our faith traditions are built on love of God, love of neighbor. That those are two things, but that what we end up doing is we have these beliefs in our heads that are not actually practiced out loud in community. Some of the things that we see right now are the exact opposite of love. They're hate. It's hate rhetoric. It's wanting us to hate our neighbors if they look different from us, if they worship differently from us. Mike, in your years of experience in communications, what can you tell us that can help us, as scriptures say, be wise as serpents, as innocent as doves, which the way I think of that as like knowing when a political ad is wanting to create a knee-jerk reaction in us, wanting us to react rather than think through something. And then innocent as doves, like thinking about, what are some thoughtful responses so that we don't become more of the same and perpetuate the same hate that's going on?
Well, the first would be turn off television and don't watch any political ads for the next week. That would be one suggestion. No, but I think we've got to define, this will be a Christian reference, so it's not, but I think it's universal in all of our faith traditions represented here. You have to treat thy neighbor as thyself. Mm-hmm. And we have to, in our political communication, say, I'm not going to run an ad that I would not want to see turned around and run against me.
Yeah.
In the same volume and the same tone. So I've got to figure out some way to use language. I mean, I have no problem with negative ads or, bringing up negative information about your opponent. That's part of politics. It's, politics is not, it's not beanball. So there's going to be, it's a tough sport. But on the other hand, you could find a tonal quality, whereas I'm not going to do things and say things that I would not want my opponent to say and do against me. So it's kind of a golden rule of politics. If we could kind of find some way to institute that or make that kind of the norm of political behavior, as opposed to what we see going on right now, I think that would make a difference. And that requires, the political operative class, the people, a lot of folks that I know very, very well, to sort of agree that we're just going to change the rules of how we conduct our politics, and that we've gone in a direction that doesn't make sense anymore, and that we have to change it. That's maybe Pollyannish, but it's, the best that I can think of is to really get smart people who work in politics, who actually want to do good in politics on both, whatever side of the political aisle they're on, to get them to say, we've got to do the work that we do as a profession better than what we're doing now. And and believe me, I've had this conversation with a lot of people. There are a lot of people who work at senior levels in political campaigns that say, yeah, I would, I'd get behind that, but we do what we have to do to win elections. And, that's where we have to kind of change the equation, I think.
So this is what I think we see, is that people are being used as pawns in somebody else's divisiveness scheme, in somebody else's voting scheme. It's almost like they're dependent upon people not really delving into issues that are just labels that are thrown out there that are meant to make you angry. Socialism, communism, left wing, right wing, extremist. What are some of the practices that we can take on that would actually help us not be pawns in those schemes?
Well, I have a number of it, but it seems to me, I'm intrigued, Sabina, the work you're doing, you are doing a lot of this here. What have your main takeaways been of what you think as strategy or tactics is most effective in the communications front?
I mean, so before there's hate, there's dehumanization. So, you don't just go to hate. First you just kind of create, this idea that, just like, if you had a friend, family member, you give them a lot of excuses. If they said something or did something wrong, you give them a lot of excuses, you give them some leeway. But when you're a minority group, you don't get that. And so the moment something you do or somebody in your community does something, then it reflects on the entire community. And that is that has been very hard to challenge. It used to be when there was some kind of terrorist attack, it was every Muslim had to go on record condemning it. It's not us, it's not Islam. But over time, we've been turning it around, and it's okay, and a lot of white Christians are creating, doing mass shootings. Why aren't you apologizing for that? And so, kind of turning things around. So look, if you're not apologizing that, why are you expecting me to apologize for that? But, in some of the work we've done, and especially when politicians have come out and said something directly against their community. So, our governor, when he was running for governor in 2018, made some slight, comment against Muslims, and we called him out publicly, and then he called me and he's apologized for it. But there are other times when we see that it's not strategic for us as Muslims, as a Muslim organization, to lead that fight. And so there was going to be, I think it was 2017, a security summit, or I think maybe early 2018, a security summit at one of the local colleges. And one of the, I think, congressional candidates was trying to make some inroads with the Islamophobic community, and had Islamophobes going to talk about security, and that's just kind of we knew it was going to be Muslim bashing, and so we could have taken the lead and telling the president of the college, hey, you shouldn't be having this, you shouldn't have your organization be associated with this kind of lecture series. And but what we did is we chose to work with allies and alumni of that university to put that pressure on, because that was far more effective. Because sometimes when we're the ones challenging it openly, there's a backlash, and there more Islamophobes will come out and be even more strongly, speaking out. And so just it's like you have to use the proper strategy, and that's sometimes the things I have to tell my own community members. They were like, after the Tennessean ad, they're like, we need a lawsuit, we need to sue the Tennessean. I'm like, that's not strategically, we need them. We need them to get our stories out. We've had a relationship with them. So how we really want to change the culture, and recognize what has been good. And so just being strategic in how you do it, and whether it's your voice that needs to be out front and center, or you need your allies by your side speaking up.
Sabina, let me jump on there, because that's something that I've worked for several years here in Nashville, just as the rabbi and Mike had said, is that you have to build these relationships before trouble happens. Mm-hmm. But then when trouble happens, there's still a bit of skittishness. And again, from my marginalized place that I'm viewing this, also as a Christian, but that there's a God of white supremacy that I think, for me, that seems to be the delineation that creates the most disturbance for me, in that we've been advocating for social and civil rights, but there was always this public way in which we did that folks had this civility, whether it was real or sincere, that folk kind of lived up to that, and you go out in the hallway and you curse and do whatever. That's gone. So back during the COB that was passed here, the Civilian Oversight Board, and the state legislature sought to overturn it, and they end up cherry picking. They took the subpoena power away. So we appeared before some of the Senate committees to talk about and beg that they not do that. And one of the state legislatures, actually two of them, were really insultive during the hearing to me. The feeling I remember was the kid on the ball field who says, I don't believe you really meant to talk to me like that. But there was something bigger that's at work here. But the ease in which this person sought not only to say no to my ask, but to say, you're crazy, y'all in Nashville, and you're anti-police, and you don't care about law and order, and you're not gonna come up here. And so I guess my question is, this period will change. And I think the current administration has helped to fan the flames to bring out what was already there. It didn't just show up, but it had some respectability about it. When this changes, how do you go back to those who came out of that position with any type of integrity to continue conversation along policy. I wrestle with that because I remember when you felt you had the green light. Now here we are, you can't be nice to me again. So, I mean, I know I'm probably wondering and talking, but, and I think Sabina, you as a minority, but, and even you too, Rabbi, that what I found interesting is you enjoy a luxury sometimes that I don't, is that if you don't declare it, sometimes you can move as white. So how because this is not going away, this is going to be, the trouble may even happen on down the road. I legitimately feel that if cooler heads and the common good doesn't come forward, we could literally have a civil war.
Yeah.
We're already seeing hotspots pop up, and seems like now every time there's a large protest, someone will get ran over in that crowd. So what do we do as people of faith to reclaim the God of love and justice that is not a respecter of person and that is the creator of all of us? So I don't know, I wrestle with that. My own way of being in the political spectrum is challenged and pushed. Can y'all help me?
I want to say I'm tired of hating. Like, I'm tired. We're already like tired of the elections. I mean, everyone's ready for it to be done with, right? But I'm tired of that, you know, that bad feeling that I have for the other side that is harming my community. I'm tired of that. And I think you bring up, you know, and this point was brought up before, like, how do we go beyond the election? And how do you repair those relationships of people you knew when they had the green light to say, like, we know discrimination, I know Islamophobia was there. And to me, like, since the 2008 election, it was slowly going up and up and up, and more things that people weren't allowed to say publicly was being said, and it was newspaper articles, and then of course with Trump's election, it just was out in the open. But it didn't happen overnight. It was always there, and just in different levels. But then, you know, if the election goes the way many of us want, like, how do we go back to a place where there's civility again? And again, these are, you know, just as much as we want to be humanized by the other side, I guess we've got to also humanize those who have caused this harm. And what does that kind of reconciliation look like? I mean, I don't know, but if we don't think about it, if we don't plan for it, if we don't take those steps, you know, I don't want 4 more years. I mean, I try not to watch the news. It just it just annoys me too much. I think it's bad for your mental health. But it's just going to be, the media, that's what they do. They play on controversy, and they're going to keep on playing it, regardless of who wins. And we've got to get out of that.
Mike, oh, sorry.
Well, let me speak to 3 different parts of this for a moment. The first is the long term. What happens with our youth right now? Here, because they're going to be the future. Here, and what happens in our public schools? What kind of service requirements do they have? Here, what kind of programs are there? At what age is appropriate? Learning about religion. You can't teach religion, but you can teach about religion. What exposure do they have to religion? How do they deal with religious conflicts in the school? You have a phenomenal resource in Tennessee. Some of you may know him by name, if not in person, Reverend Buzz Thomas, who with Charles Haynes of the Freedom Forum, created the Common Ground Project that really transformed a lot of the debate on these issues. He lives in Maryville, was the head of the superintendent of the schools in Knoxville for a while, headed a foundation there. He's phenomenal on these kinds of issues. Here, what about our own youth groups? What kind of efforts are they doing? And do they always do it on their own, or do they do it with people from other religions, maybe some strange bedfellow religions where they can find common ground so they get to know others and learn each other's and humanize others? From the very beginning, we have to work on those kinds of things. So that's building for the future there. The second is the media. Here, and some of this I learned from Mike, listening. Some I learned from my wife, who's a journalist. Here, we really have to be very intentional about the media. We really have to sit down with local media, with the newspapers, which are different than electronic media. We've really seen a declining number of major television and religion entities that have religion reporters today. But in your community, in your state, there ought to have religion reporters. And when they're writing stories in which religion is an issue, and they're going to turn to more fundamentalist voices that don't agree with the more moderate and liberal voices, that you gotta call them on it all the time here, so that they're also turning to more representative, broader spectrum of representative voices there. It means getting to know the editors, getting to know the reporters working on stories here, make it easy for them. Don't just complain about it. Come with them with the kind of thing they could have added to a story that would make a difference. So the next time you can just send it to them, not just a press release. Try to figure out what they need. What's the 1 or 2 paragraphs that they actually might quote, rather than a long press release you're doing. Do some media training with your own religious leaders, not just the clergy, but others who can speak as religious figures. Nothing is more important than a prominent figure in your community who people don't think of as being religious, who then speaks in religious terms. I mean, when you put Bill Clinton or Obama, in front of a church here, and you're listening to masterful voices in religious rhetoric because they own it, it's them. Here, I mean, Mike McCurry didn't have to do it for them. He had a partner who he was working with both Clintons in that regard. And their messages from the pulpit were really powerful. Well, what about other civic leaders who share your views? That helps change people's perception of religion. And then making strange bedfellow, what Sabina said before, you have to agree to disagree. Here, when we put together RIFRA in the days that everyone in the religious community was involved in that, and Buzz was the chair of that a national coalition that did that in the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Person Act that followed. When we did that stuff, I built on that with evangelicals and the Catholic bishops to pass a whole bunch of bills: the International Religious Freedom Act, the Sudan Peace Act, the prison rape bill that was passed, a whole bunch of legislation we got through in the Bush administration because of relations that we had built and willingness to work together, even though we disagreed on the majority of the public policy issues. But we actually used that to change each other. And those kinds of engagements actually led to moving the evangelical community into the environmental issue, into economic justice issues in ways that they had not been, not because they were against it, putting aside the prosperity segment of the evangelical Christianity. Not because they were against it, but they were focused on the social issues. And we were able to help use the relationships to engage them on other issues. So those kind of models are some of the things that I think strategy and tactics can make a difference. And again, I learned some of this from Mike. So you got the master here on this, and I'd love to hear him.
Rabbi, I'll echo everything you just said. I think a lot of it is that, I'll start with the first point you made, engaging the media. We have our local faith leaders sometimes are very skeptical and suspicious of the media because they feel like we're not going to get quoted right, or they're always kind of looking for controversy and they don't want to do good things. And I do a lot of work on this. I mean, I do a lot of panels and discussions with executive editors and other people. I said, look, you know, you think that news is confrontation and conflict, and it would frankly be news to many Americans that actually sometimes people come together and they do the right thing and they do good things. And what, you know, you need to cover more of that. That's newsworthy. You know, that's news. That's contrary to what people actually think is happening because they only see the conflict and they see the controversy. So that point number one, and that is incumbent on all of us in this area to be more engaged, to know who our reporters are, to know them by name, to have relationships, not just when they're working on some kind of hot story, but to actually, you know, they feel like they can come into you and sort of say, hey, I'm looking for a perspective on this particular story that I'm working on, and they feel comfortable calling you and you feel comfortable dealing with them. And we have too few people in our, you know, leadership in our faith communities that are comfortable doing that. That would be point one. The second thing is the issue of generational change. Now, I'm optimistic because all of us who are in the baby boom generation and older, not you, Sabina, but you know, we're going to go on the wayside pretty soon now, and our kids are coming along. We're going to the other side, David, as we would say, and our kids are much more engaged. They're much more comfortable dealing in environments of diversity. You know, they kind of like when the gay marriage issue erupted in my church, the Methodist Church, you know, our kids said, what are you talking about? Like, what's your problem? And so I think that there's going to be a cycling through of some of these things as we move into a place where our younger folk begin to take more leadership positions. My point earlier that I made was we have to encourage them to take that leadership role within our faith communities, within our churches and our synagogues and our mosques, because we need them to be, you know, rejuvenate some of what a faith tradition can actually mean. And then my third point to add to your list of things, we used to do, when I was in high school, we had a class called civics. And we actually learned what citizenship was all about and what it meant to be a citizen and voting and, you know, what the responsibilities are. As near as I can tell, that is like long gone in the curriculum of most of our public school curriculum in any case. And so I think teaching people the skills of citizenship and what it means to be a contributing member of a community in which you have political responsibility to speak up and take responsibility for your own political actions and citizenship actions. I think we've got to rejuvenate that part of our curriculum.
Good point. Good point. We've had one question. If any of you on Facebook want to add a question, please do it, and then we'll field the questions to you all. And I think we've covered a lot of this, but one participant is saying it is very clear that organizations such as Fox News profit by selling conspiracy theories, falsehoods, and inciting division. When there is a concerted effort to mislead the public, how can the rest of us stop the cult-like movement that is intended to support a particular agenda, especially when the rest of us try to be polite and kind in communications and are thus steamrolled by the brash tactics of bullies on the right? Mike, I don't know, would you like to start that, or? Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, there's a big transformation happening in the whole media universe in the United States. We are moving to what I would call more a British model, where we have media organizations that are aligned politically with different points of view. And it's been kind of slowly happening. There was this idea, we're impartial and we're fair and balanced and we don't take political sides. but that's been slowly changing as we see, Fox, we see the Murdoch empire and its media enterprises, beginning to espouse more of a conservative point of view. And frankly, I think we need to counteract that on the left with a more progressive point of view. And I'm sure there are many conservatives say, well, we already have that because there's a liberal bias in the fake news. I mean, that's the way, Donald Trump would probably put it. But that's not necessarily an unhealthy thing. That if we have vibrant news organizations that are clearly identified espousing certain points of view, then then everybody knows, like, this is what we're going to get if we go and have this particular news organization or this particular newspaper delivered. We do need, in that case, some places that are rock solid, ground zero, here's the facts and all that you could ask for. And I had this conversation, a friend of mine, college classmate of mine, is Eric Schmidt. He used to be the chairman of Google. Google's been much in the news recently. And I asked him, I said, why don't you just buy the New York Times and turn it into this kind of rock solid platform of nothing but factual information, so that everybody would sort of say, okay, I'm on the right, I'm on the left, I listen to this, I listen to that, but I know there's one place where there's indisputable factual information that will help me form my opinion. Another famous phrase of my former boss, Moynihan, who I keep quoting, is, we're all entitled to our own opinion, but not to our own facts. So where are we going to get our facts? And what platform could we create where people sort of say, okay, regardless of where we are and what we want to believe, there's some place where there's kind of factual information that we all use to kind of form our opinions and then have our debates. And we lack that right there, because everybody thinks there's bias in whatever media platform they go to. And frankly, there probably is a little bit of that, but we could reconstitute something that is kind of a factual platform that people could actually rely upon. That would be a great thing.
There's not parity entirely on this, in the sense that I think people who like, let's say, CNN and MSNBC would acknowledge that the network news and PBS is less politicized than their own things are. But people on the right think all of it is a conspiracy, part of the deep conspiracy, that deep state conspiracy that undermines us. But this manipulation news, I don't want to disillusion anyone here. This goes back to the Bible. The only reference to the media I can think of in the Bible, when King Saul and Jonathan are killed, David says, tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, censor the news so that the Philistines would not be emboldened by the fact that he was on. So, there's a long history to this as well.
The original spin doctor.
Yeah. One thing too, I think that we've got kind of working against us in the day of internet news is cookies. Because if you go once to a website, they're going to feed you more of the same. And so you're not going to get balanced news in your news feed, but you're going to be getting stuff that they just think you like, and you're going to get more of the same. And you can live in a bubble and never even know that other sides exist.
Yeah, and there's a paradox.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Go ahead, Sabina.
Yeah, I mean, this being able to understand fact from fiction, and this goes back to how we teach our children. What are we learning in school? Are we learning to be critical thinkers, or are we just learning to accept what is being handed down to us by teachers? And teachers are not perfect, but really that critical thinking aspect is not there. And sometimes there's media to the right, there's media to the left, and then I see Muslims kind of get thrown under the bus by both sides. So just an interesting fact is, one study showed that if there's a terrorist plot and the suspects are Middle Eastern or Muslim looking, whatnot, it gets 700 times more media coverage. And this is not just one network over another, 700 more times media coverage than if it was a white supremacist far right plot. So just imagine, what does that do to your psyche? So you make it out, this is so bad, this is so much worse, and you're looking at the white plot as there's mental illness, some kids getting together, whatnot. And so it's just the danger of media. It'd be nice to have somewhere you just got facts, but that education on how do we, about social media, how these news media feed works, but then there's peer groups. We get news from our peers also, and that will drive a lot of our opinions about other people. And so how do you break up the cycle so there's more critical thinking, more real education on what's going on?
Yeah, can I make one quick point? In dealing with a lot of reporters, especially reporters that cover politics, they are a very secular bunch. There are very few of them that really understand much about religion, the nuance of religion. I mean, there are some very, very fine reporters. I think Sarah Lee Bailey and Michelle Bornstein at the Washington Post, good examples of people who actually understand some of this stuff. But there's very, very little coverage, very little interest in editors and others in sort of understanding how religion impacts the way in which we form, values and community attitudes and how that impacts our politics. There's just not many people who understand that. And I think, Sabina, it's especially true in the Muslim world. I mean, I think nobody, the point you just made, I mean, very few reporters that understand anything about the religious tradition that actually informs now an increasing number of Americans. And how you educate more reporters and more editors and get them more engaged in some of these conversations. I mean, that's a project that I think, Saperstein, you and I should, talk about this more and take some of this on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm seeing our work cut out for us in Nashville.
Well, yes, I've tried to maintain and cultivate relationships. Part of the Nashville Community Bail Fund, the city arrested a homeless individual who escaped a homeless encampment that they set up for folks with COVID. The bail fund bailed him out, and the reporter could not get the line of questioning, even as I tried to talk to her off camera. She wanted us to tell her how we felt responsible for where this one person was going. Now, this same reporter was aware that at that time, 6,000 Nashvillians had tested positive, and there was no mechanism for where they were at. They could have left and went straight to Kroger. And even as I tried to help her with what the issue was, even to this day, she will avoid me. And so I even asked her, I said, is it your editor I need to talk to? Because you're missing the story. I mean, that enforcement only starts now, but there have been 5,000. The city issued no restraints to any of the regular people who had COVID. Hey, you got COVID, go home. Okay, I'll go home. Homeless guy gets COVID, he goes to jail, but the story is, where is he going? He's wandering around our streets.
So if that were I, in your situation, I would have made a good effort the way you did. And if you began to hit that wall, I would have gone to one of the other media entities, the local NPR station or another newspaper, and someone else and say, I got a good story for you that this reporting has totally missed about that. And actually, just keep pressing until you find someone who will go with it. Don't, when you hit a wall like that, it's rare to be able to solve it in the short run. You may be able to work with that entity and that reporter in the long run, but better to look for other avenues of people who will feel, oh, I missed that story that they got. And then when you come and say, well, they got it wrong, or they missed the important part of it, here, you give them something that allows them to compete with the other entity.
And,
so that's, something to think for.
And also, cultivate your allies. I mean, I know I used to spend time in Nashville at United Methodist Communications, which is headquartered there in Nashville. And you got to get other faith leaders and people who are actually, I mean, they have good communicators there who actually understand a lot of this stuff. And we got to get more of them engaged. Now,
and if you get 10 people calling in here from different religious groups backing your position on it, it's going to be listened to in a way that it won't, no matter who the one person is who's doing it. The religious community also is on this, Neely, is playing a lead role in the efforts now to get Facebook and the other entities and Twitter and the other entities here to actually be more responsible about trying to diffuse obviously wrong things. Of course, it's a paradoxical situation because the notion that we want a private entity or a government for that matter deciding what's true, what's not true is a very dangerous path to go down. But we're in a new universe. I mean, you got to remember if this had happened in 1604 and Galileo had said, we rotate around the sun, they would have knocked it off with a warning that this was not, it doesn't have any basis, in fact. So there's a danger to that. But we're being really responsible, playing
fake
a
news
role in demanding accountability right now from these major internet entities, social media entities here, and that's something to be proud of.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, we are at time right now, and I feel like we could go on for another half hour. Mike, would you like to conclude, because you did not finish what you were saying? I think you were. Do you want to finalize that point before we sign off for the night?
No, I can't even remember what point I'm supposed to highlight.
Okay.
I think I think it's been a good conversation. I mean, to kind of wrap it up, I think engaging with the public media in a more direct and aggressive way, and understanding them. I mean, look, my theory is that you really have to kind of have relationships and engage with them in order to be able to tell your story the way you want to tell it. And we don't do a good job of making that happen. And I think that's where we need to kind of concentrate some effort. Certainly in my work now in theological education, we ought to be doing more of that at the seminary. But I think we need to engage other communities. And thinking of Sabina, our focus is obviously more Protestant Christian, but I think we've got to be more ecumenical in the way we engage other communities in that conversation. So I think that the three of us that have been on this panel, maybe it's a reflection of the way in which you have conversations that sort of draw different perspectives in, and we find some common issues that we all need to wrestle with. I think.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's what we say it down here. We wrestle down here. Sabina, you also make a closing comment.
Thank you. I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about communication, it's all about our relationship with media, and it's directly the religious organizations' relationship with media and AMAC. But it's also the everyday person's relationship with how they consume media. That conversation needs to be had. We need better education towards a goal of being able to discern where it is opinion, because most talk shows are all about opinions. It's not about facts, and so being able to understand this is opinion and these are facts, and so we probably need better education in our communities.
Yeah, diet control. How do we consume? What do we consume?
Turn it off. That's what I'm for.
Yeah. So, y'all, this has been such a great conversation, and I think that we have really uncovered some new thoughts that we can wrestle with in this next week, and hopefully put some of these thoughts into practice, because it is when we practice love, we learn to love. We practice love, we learn to love, and that's what it's about. Not just the feel-good love or the love of chocolate or the sentimental love of Valentine's Day. It's practicing love with justice and equity and mercy for those around us. So may we grow in love this week.
Well, I am grateful again to be in the company of you amazing people who have got work to do. And preachers don't have to cite other folks. That's in the Bible, I think. But I am grateful. I really am, for your commitments in the areas that you give your lives to, that create meaning, that I think will continue on well past this particular moment. I am grateful. You've given me some things to think about personally, even as I try to navigate during this period. Appreciate you, Nilly, for even letting me go along for this ride.
We can go alone.
And so again, one last thing, Rabbi Saperstein, if somebody comes up on you and say, hey, do you know a guy in Nashville? Just say, yeah. Just say, yeah, yes, he's my friend.
You folks are just such wonderful people to be interacting with these. I've enjoyed myself on both of these sessions I've done with you. You really are. So I thank you very much. And you have great people on the show, so thanks.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, next week, we're going to conclude the series. And next week is on recognizing and dismantling systems of oppression within our own households, houses of prayer, city, states, nation. And that's going to lead us right up into the election. I'm going to actually be near Washington, D.C. in next week's conversation. So I won't be here in this esteemed location where John Lewis and C.T. Vivian did their refining work. And so I want to thank again our sponsors, American Baptist College, Harper Hill Global, Glencliff United Methodist Church, and hopefully you all will have a good night, rest well, and peace.